Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode. Hopefully you guys caught last week's with EP out in South Dakota, able to slip around on that flock and being able to pull off a shot. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure he gave me the cold that he had on the way home. Been kind of sick the last few days, but that's all right. Tonight, let's talk about hunting early season turkeys. Right now, a ton of states are coming in and turkey hunting's getting underway. Some of you northern states are going to take off a little later, but right now, a lot of states are at it and at it hard. So we're going to talk about hunting early season. One thing I want to point out is early season turkeys are different than your season just starting. There's a difference. Here in Indiana, our season doesn't start until April 27th. That's not early season. It might be early in our hunting season, but they're not early season turkeys. That time is done, gone, and past. Right now, turkeys they've been out doing their thing. They've been gobbling now for 3 to 4 weeks already here in Indiana. So there is a difference. So make sure you guys kind of understand that I'm talking about the pattern that turkeys are in at this time of year. And right now they're underway, especially in those southern states. They're already been doing their thing for a while. Excuse me. But tonight, when we're talking about early season tactics, there's a couple things I want you to keep in mind. One thing is their food source. Okay, so food sources are going to change as the spring changes. Right now, when it's early, some of that vegetation hasn't came on yet that they're used to eating. The bugs, the snakes, things like that, they haven't quite come out in full swing. Grasshoppers, crickets. So their food sources may not quite be what they're going to be later in the season, and so that will shift their patterns a little bit. So if you can find the food source that they're on right now, it might be an old acorn crop, it might be an old picked grain field, something like that that's still got some grain left in it. Things like that. That's gonna help you find those turkeys in the early season. And again, that's going to shift here in the next couple weeks. That leads me into my next thing with the foliage. Typically early season, depending on where you're hunting, the foliage is pretty sparse. And if that's the case, you got to take that into consideration. Now let's start with on the roost, okay? Typically I like to get to close as a gobbler as I can get to off the roost. But if there's not much foliage on, even if I get in there really early before daylight, I don't like to get super close to him to where he can see me. So if I'm sitting there, if I call to him while he's on the limb or whatever, I don't want him to be able to pinpoint my spot, my location, and know exactly what he's looking at from the tree if there's not much foliage on. So when you're thinking about those early morning setups, kind of keep that in mind. The other thing is you got to think about, without having a whole lot of foliage on, is moving on birds, through the middle of the day or later on in the morning. If you hear a bird that, he might be a ridge over or something like that, and you're going to try to slip around, get in front of him, or get on the same ridge as him, get in that bubble, as what we like to call it. If there's no growth in leaves or the foliage or anything like that, he can see a long way and he can see very accurately. So you got to really kind of, make tough decisions in this early spring on how to move on gobblers. Make sure that you're using some woodmanship. Make sure you're putting a hill in between you and him, getting down in a ditch line, a creek, a draw, whatever it might be. To be able to move on him. I don't recommend doing a lot of moving around in this early season when we don't have a lot of foliage to cover up that movement. Now if you know that the coast is clear or whatever, do your thing. Obviously I always try to not walk across an open field or anything like that at any time anyway, but make sure you're choosing the right path when moving on gobblers, because right now, it's an easy way to get busted in this early season because they can see so much farther. The last thing I want to talk about is the pecking order and kind of what the flock looks like at this time of year. Right now they're still in large groups, and in some states they're still in large groups, and they haven't quite busted up. Now, once you start getting down, southern parts, obviously those flocks have probably busted up by now, and they're starting to do their things more heavily. But right now, as those flocks are separating, and as those toms are separating, jakes are separating, and they're really searching for hens in the early season, typically, a gobbler will have a lot of hens with him. They're going to roost together or whatever until those hens are really pretty much bred. So you're going to have a lot of competition as a caller, as a hunter trying to get him in close, just due to the flock size and the number of birds that are going to be together at this time of year. You're going to start seeing them fight for more dominance as they're trying to sort out that pecking order in terms of breeding. So the key part there to recognize is if they're trying to figure out who's who, decoys work really well right now this time of year in this early season. If you've got a bird who hasn't been whipped yet, if you got like what would typically be a subordinate gobbler, he might not be subordinate yet. He might still think that he's got some battle left in him or whatever, and using those male decoys to challenge him, whether it's a jake, half strut jake, full strutter, whatever it might be, that might work better this time of season to get that bird to come in and challenge that male bird, to coax him in, thinking that he's in his territory. Whereas later in the spring, we're going to talk about this later, but if a bird's already got his butt whipped once or twice, and you got a male decoy sitting out there, he may not come up there looking for a fight. He might turn his head the other way and go opposite direction. So right now, decoys can play a vital role. Same thing with hens. Even if you just got hen decoys out, right now birds are in pretty large numbers depending on what state you're in, but they're still traveling in quite a few. So if you've got a couple of hens out there and you're doing some soft calling, purring, clucking, some whining, some whistles, and it's just like you're over there feeding at a buffet, you're more likely to attract those hens in there in that larger group, to drag that gobbler in there with them into gun range to get you that shot. So that's another thing to kind of think about. Also think about your calls. Turkeys are really getting really vocal right now. Gobblers are gobbling, hens are doing their thing. This is the time where calling does not hurt. This is a time where turkeys are, this is it. This is where they're really getting into it. Even when we was in South Dakota, they weren't quite doing their mating scene yet. There were some birds gobbling, but they weren't interested in the mating thing when we were there. And every morning there were tons and tons and tons of vocalizations going on. I mean, you could hear hens all around you. Gobblers were gobbling. Jakes were gobbling. Jakes were yelping. I heard some jakes yelping too. So, be vocal. Don't be afraid to call, especially this time. Right now, they are really starting to turn it on. So, early season is different than hunting late season. And just to kind of recap, when you get in there and you get set up, you want to get close, but you don't want to get too close to where he can see you. You want to make sure that you're checking your food sources and making sure that they're still hitting those food sources. And as farmers start taking off, as things start greening up, farmers are going to be spraying fields and disking fields and whatever, and vegetation is going to start growing. Bugs are going to start being, obviously a lot more available to them. And so their food source is going to change, and that hunting tactic is going to change as well with them. And then also remember the pecking order. Make sure that you're able to challenge that bird if he's a bird that's willing to be challenged. Don't be afraid to use those decoys this time of year, because they can be really effective, even if it's just pulling a hen over there to drag him along behind with her. So hopefully you guys learned something. Keep this stuff in mind. Again, nothing's set in stone. But this is kind of some stuff that I think works this time of year. So good luck. Hopefully you guys are starting to knock them down. Remember, Put your next long beard on speed dial with a Spring Fever custom call. See you guys next week.